Chapter 14. My Experience, Strength, and Hope. The following was a speech I was supposed to give on July 22nd, 2023. I was supposed to share my experience, strength, and hope to an Al-Anon audience, but I never had the chance to deliver that speech because of my accident. So I'll share it with you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Vince. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Annette and Charlotte for asking me to speak tonight. When they asked and told me I was going to be the headliner tonight, I was beside myself. How am I going to fill 30 minutes, not skipping a beat, and that assured me that with my gift of gab, that they'd probably run over. Hopefully, you won't be disappointed. I'd also like to lower your expectations and tell you I have no wisdom outside the 12 steps in the literature provided to us in the program of Al-Anon. I'll share my experience, strength, and hope. And with that out of the way, let's get into this thing. My experience. In September of 2022, when I arrived in Al-Anon after a 13-year hiatus, my return differed from the usual circumstances. I didn't have an active qualifier in my life when I arrived. I had been through a bad breakup, and it had been over a year since I had direct physical contact with her. However, with all that time that had passed, I had a hole deep down inside that couldn't be mended by any temporary fixes or distractions, no matter how hard I tried. In the previous 18 months, I found myself in therapy and in complete disarray, only able to manage the very basics, job and bills. Mostly I found myself lonely and seeking attention, affirmation, and approval through less than desirable situations. I used people and other things to try to fill the emptiness I was feeling. In 2021, I was barely living, much less acting and behaving like a human being. I was living in a deficit, a moral and virtuous deficit. I was merely surviving. Most of all, regret, self-loathing had begun to creep back in, and I was slowly killing myself. The nihilistic thoughts and suicide began to creep into the forefront of my mind. I simply did not like the person I was becoming, the toxic person staring at me in the mirror. Most of my days were spent in a depressed state, unable to focus and confused. The ghosts of my past haunted me daily. With God's and Al-Anon's help, I realized I needed to pull my head out of my ass. How did I get back here? What lessons do I need to relearn? Why do I continue to attract unavailable women? I sought out professional therapy, but the psychiatrist wanted to prescribe medications to help me with my anxiety and depression. I responded by saying I already know how to sedate myself. I'm good at it. What I need is to get to the root of the issue. She insisted we poke around my childhood. I explained in a fit of frustration. The child inside wants you to provide the adult outside with tools to get through this shit, specifically the horrible emotions and the emptiness inside. A few weeks later, I fired her. That's when I met my life coach and now friend, a professional business coach, Chris, who asked what I wanted to achieve from these sessions. I responded that I needed tools to help me deal with these shattered emotions. My coach hailed from a similar background as mine, so he understood where I was and met me there. He provided the tools I needed to escape the pain of being involved with toxic people. However, my life wasn't in alignment with the old man upstairs, and there was something still missing, me. I wanted to continue to sedate myself with more recklessness. And the thought hit me. It wasn't my drinking, but my thinking. The old man upstairs sends me these inspired messages occasionally, and I liken them to shock therapy. They hit me like a lightning strike. And then I change course, make the necessary adjustments, and align myself with the universe. This epiphany led me back to Al-Anon. I had done some work in the program a few years earlier and returned on September 10th, 2022. Took a few meetings to hear what I needed, however, the message rang loud and clear. I heard a member share his experience, strength, and hope, and much like all of you, I heard my story. I realized I was codependent and rescuing women from themselves was my modus operandi. I was the knight in lackluster armor. I needed to get a handle on this need for people pleasing, and I needed to understand why I required people to like me. Al-Anon quickly helped me realize my issue was my relationships with others, and most importantly, my relationship with myself. I needed to find Vince again. Most people I've encountered aren't self-reflective and typically run around oblivious to the world, selfish and concerned only about what is directly in front of their nose. This statement isn't an indictment, it is an observation. Over the last 30 years, my issue is that I expect too much from the general population, and I may expect too much from me. I also fear being disliked because who approves, affirms, or validates a disliked person? I have a relationship problem with people and I'm addicted to anger and control. My inability to manage my reactions to people, places, and things was fostered from a young age and reinforced by impulsive behavior. I have found that the only way to correct this behavior is through the 12 steps of Al-Anon. My strengths. About November of 2022, I began to work on my fourth step. Steps 1, 2, and 3 were slam dunks. In my lows, I had the wherewithal to communicate with the old man upstairs. He has guided me on this journey since my first DUI in 1991. I believe he has had my back and never leaves me. I have conversations with him almost daily. He allows me to be me. He accepts this vulgar child as I present myself. Steps 1 and 2 were easy to do. While on the outside I was looking good, I could recognize my emotions were all over the board and unmanageable. I also knew that the old man upstairs would guide me to where I needed to go. Though typically it requires an ass ton of hard work, he never disappoints. This time my fourth step was different. I'm fully aware of my character defects and shortcomings. I have had the last 30 years to explore them. Or you can ask all of my failed relationships. They'd happily pontificate about my shortcomings. I had to look at those positive attributes I bring to humanity and learn about Vince again. Some time ago, during my marriage, I lost who I was and subsequently caused a horrific chain of events that led me into my own personal hell again. I had to look at my codependency issues and I had to understand why I require someone else's approval, someone outside me to validate me. I had to investigate why I placed everything I was on the back burner to accommodate someone else. I had to investigate my role when seeking attention, affection, and approval. Before I go on, I want to provide a little more history. My father was a heavy-handed alcoholic. I spent years in other programs and therapy dealing with this truth. However, I never investigated the relationship I had with my mother. I remember an evening at a very young age when I was bathed and ready for bed, and again, my mother had been a victim of my father's drunken rage. At 7, I decided to save my mother and confront my dad and give him a piece of my mind. I began to lecture him. I pleaded with him to stop drinking and told him I didn't like it when he was drunk. I said he wasn't my daddy when he drank, and I wanted him to stop hurting mommy and to leave if he continued to treat us this way. A swift backhand to the face sent me flying across the room, and I learned 4 things that day. How to be a hero and rescue women. I didn't have a voice against authority figures. How to be codependent, dysfunctional, and live in denial. Anger and violence are how you shut people up. Playing the role of martyr and victim, I learned to blame all my problems on other people. Mother, father, sister, girlfriend, wife, etc. Rejecting the idea that my stupid decision put me in harm's way. My last defunct relationship with my latest qualifier perfectly exemplifies this thinking in 2020. I purchased my ex-girlfriend's home so she could buy herself a brand new construction in another city. Think about this for a minute. I was in love, my girlfriend needed finances, I bought her house and she moved away and broke up with me. All counterintuitive to my plans of seeking attention, approval, and affection, much less intimacy. My 4th step helped me realize several things. I am human and I am fallible. It taught me to accept everything about me, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It also helped me realize that I can love not just for the other people, but for myself. My 5th step helped me realize that I habitually conceded, bent my knee, and moved my boundaries for many years. Every time I negotiated, accommodated someone else, and put myself last, I betrayed myself and my needs. I never learned to ask for what I needed. In the not so distant past, this realization came to a head. I was hosting a barbecue for a group of friends in my new home. The same one I had purchased from my ex. The day was going well, good food, good drink, good people, and cornhole, all the makings of a fun time. However, one of my Guests suggested that we move the party to a venue in Folsom to watch live music. I responded graciously, saying, "That sounds like fun. Enjoy yourselves. I'll be here when you return." Well, guess what? You could hear the record scratch. "You're coming with us," they said. "No, I'm fine where I'm at," I told them. I didn't want to go. It didn't take long, and the entire party was trying to convince me to go. I didn't want to go, yet I allowed them all to change my mind. And I went. Truthfully, I was pissed. Shortly after arriving, I left the venue abruptly, ensuring I ruined everyone else's evening because my evening was ruined. My victimhood became a weapon, and in true codependent and passive aggressive form, I threw a grenade on the whole evening. Why? Because I had conceded and moved my boundaries. Returning to my fourth step, I also had to recognize what a wonderful human being I am. This was the most challenging part of the fourth step. Making an honest inventory of my positive attributes is difficult for someone who suffers from low self worth. Growing up and including my adult relationships, I could never speak to my accomplishments or positive attributes because I would be labeled a braggart, boasting, or selfish. Again, I never allowed myself to speak to my positive attributes. I never had a voice. I depended on others' affirmation and validation, but it rarely came. The accomplishments that I did achieve were rarely spoken of, and the one person I was seeking validation from died from dementia. The approval never came. During the four-step journey and service to Al Anon, I realized I was compassionate, loving, gracious, knowledgeable, charitable, honest, and articulate. I'm also loyal, dutiful, respectful, selfless, and honorable. I possess integrity and I am courageous. Having to look at oneself and be honest is the most frightening thing we can do as humans. Identifying the role I played in my stupidity came naturally, being someone with low self esteem. However, identifying what was good about me took work. I had to, I had to identify how I allowed people, places, and things to manipulate me and recognize that ignorance isn't an excuse, including evaluating my positive attributes and what is good about me. You see, I became comfortable with it being an asshole because it meant I didn't have to try to be a virtuous human being. It's easier to wallow in the mud with the pigs. Step 6 and 7 required me to put in additional work. Faith without work is dead. I firmly believe in that statement. I had to begin to discover what it took to care for myself. 1, be of service in the program. 2, find what Vince likes again. And 3, become an active participant in my own life again. In doing so, I discovered that I am loved, that I have a family in the program of Al Anon, that I love myself, and yes, that a glass of Barbera wine with a ribeye steak is fucking amazing. I've also learned my limitations. I am learning to speak up when particular requests don't work for me. I avoid spreading myself thin. I can say no without getting angry. I also realize that when someone is gaslighting me, I can choose not to participate. Sometimes, no response is the most powerful response. Steps 8 and 9 helped me to forgive myself for doing so much damage to my life. I forgave myself for neglecting myself, for allowing my fears to run my life, and for allowing horrible humans to dictate how I should live. Step 10 is my checks and balances. When I am operating in fear or become angry, I can pause and ask myself, why did that sting? Step 11 has been the backbone of my recovery for many years. I remember a quick anecdote about this concept in early 2018, conversing with the old man upstairs. Things were not going well in my marriage, there was no communication, and the marriage had evolved into a sexless one. We were utterly indifferent to each other, completely devoid of love. I was on my way to work, in the car alone. This is where the old man and I have our best conversations. I recall asking him, should we, my then wife and I, get a divorce? 2 weeks later, he answered. She announced she wanted a divorce. My smartass replied, don't let the door hit you where the good Lord split you. Progress, not perfection. The concept of step 11 reminds me that it's my responsibility to seek out wisdom and maintain the connection. When I neglect to seek out his counsel, I drift from his grace to my detriment. Step 12. If tonight doesn't prove that step 12 is working, I don't know what to say. Between steps 4 and 10, the singular most important tradition in my life was tradition 7. Every group ought to be fully self supporting, declining outside contributions. The most glaring issue is my inability to trust the old man upstairs. After years of being prey to gaslighting by people in my life whom I thought loved me and had my best interest at heart, I made the mistake of trusting these people, relying on them to make my decisions for me and thinking their opinions mattered more than my own. The seventh tradition helps me remember that I have to be able to stand on my own 2 feet. It began slowly, taking care of my financial house and ensuring that I was fiscally responsible. With this concept in mind, I began to operate more freely regarding financial concerns. Paying bills was no longer an issue, the literal interpretation of the seventh tradition. Then I realized the spiritual premise behind Tradition 7 and how it related to people outside of me. Returning to what I said earlier, I allowed outside contributors to sway me in important life decisions. The example of buying a house comes to mind. At that time, somewhere in the back of my mind and my heart of hearts, I knew I was making a mistake, ignoring my instincts to affirm someone else's idea to gain someone else's approval, affection, and attention. Tradition 7 is a stopgap to prevent me from being persuaded by outside influences. Easier said than done. Step 7 proves that when I trust my instincts, prepare and educate myself, and trust my higher power, life seems smoother, juxtaposed to being held accountable to someone else financially or emotionally. Tradition 7 reminds me to be a pillar, to stand on my own. It also reminds me to contribute my spiritual recovery bank. I'm taking the actions required for those days when I have to withdraw from my 7 tradition account. On July 12th of 2023, I had to make a huge withdrawal from my account. I was involved in a cycling collision, traveling at speeds of up to 20 miles per hour. I went over the front handlebars of my bike and over the other cyclist who was involved. The first thing that went through my head was, as soon as I get up from this fall, I'm going to shove my foot down your fucking throat. Luckily for him, God had different plans. Not much is remembered after I went unconscious. In the emergency room, I was drifting in and out of consciousness. The doctors and nurses were asking me to provide emergency information and contacts. However, both my emergency contacts live in Idaho. My primary, a permanent resident, my secondary, a part-time resident, only to return in 2 days. My emergency contact told the ER caseworker about Malcolm and Angus, my 2 7-month-old puppies. The caseworker then asked who could take care of the dogs, and I asked her to contact Judy, a fellow member of my Friday night group. In a drug-induced, one-handed text, I sent a signal flare to my group. Hey Judy, we'll be getting a call from hospital I was admitted to. Long story, but I'll need some help with the boys. If I could compare the response to any one thing, it would be like the Flight of the Valkyries scene in Apocalypse Now. My higher power had sent the fucking cavalry. Within seconds, the entire group lit up the thread and coordinated to help me and my pups. This reinforced the idea that Jim shared with me in a meeting that Al-Anon is my family. The following morning in ICU, the attending emergency room doctor came to visit during her rounds. She informed me that I had a separated shoulder, 8 total broken ribs on the right side of my body, acute pneumothorax, where the lining separated my chest cavity, and lungs were punctured, multiple contusions and abrasions, and a bump on my noggin, so no real damage to my head. As I was lying there in the ICU, I did have a moment of why me and a pity party. However, as quickly as the thought came, it passed. It was replaced with why not you? Embrace the suck and enjoy the journey. Gratitude seeped in, and I realized that I was alive, that my body, regardless of the damage, was strong. I called the nurse to help disconnect me from the machines, and I wanted to take a few laps around the nurses' stations. I'm not Superman, so the fucking pain was excruciating. But the worst part was over. The self-doubt and self-pity came and went. The 7th tradition reinforced the concept that I'm a pillar. I am strong with my higher power and my family group. I rely on specific steps more than others. This is where I am in my recovery. However, there is no mistaking the spiritual, philosophical, and psychological impact of the 12 steps. Each step is weighted slightly differently depending on where I am in my recovery. Still, there is no mistaking the 12 steps and the 12 traditions are a divine inspiration created by some very learned men and brave and courageous women. My hope: I want to remain open and teachable. I want to continue discovering who Vince is and peel back more layers of debris. I plan to continue to learn about philosophy and stoicism. I hope to be the virtuous good man I am meant to be. There's a caveat to hope: it is contingent upon action. Every time I buy a lottery ticket, I can hope for $1 million. However, it seems ironic to be hoping for something based on a shortcut, all the while financially taxing myself when buying the winning ticket. Hope requires work, diligence, and perseverance. Hope requires working towards a virtuous life. To live a virtuous life, I must remember to give grace and not react with judgment. I need to afford myself that same grace and respond with kindness. It's a true statement that how I treat myself is how I would treat people. In other words, I treat people as I would treat myself. What this means to me and how I behaved in the not so distant past is the same contempt I held for myself was the contempt I secretly held towards other people. I remind myself daily to let go of the contempt and be gracious and patient with myself and others. Happiness and joy aren't goals to be achieved like a college degree. Hope, happiness, and joy are found in the process of life. The mundane duties and tasks that are required of me in life are there to teach me lessons daily, enjoying putting one foot in front of the other. What a concept to enjoy the simple ability to walk, both physically and metaphorically. I do not take anything in life for granted, most of all who I am and the good I can bring to the world. I plan to continue to meet more positive people like the ones I've met in this program. I must remember to be grateful to my higher power who has never left my side. I also have to be thankful to him for introducing the 12 steps to me all those years ago. Because of the 12 steps, I am learning to be a virtuous human and a good man. Today, if you were to ask me if I'm cured of my codependency or adolescent behavior, I would snicker. It would be like asking me if I'm cured of my humanity. These character defects are ingrained into my psyche and the fibers of my being. A better question would be how I manage my compulsive behavior. I would then respond with the following: God, first and foremost, the 12 steps. These behaviors do not serve me today. And finally, mind my own fucking business. My character defects are two sides of the same coin. Whether self medicated or sober, fear, anger, and contempt are miserable feelings to live with. I am the common denominator, and it is my choice what I do and whom I choose to associate with. Unlike when I was a child and had no voice, and much less choice. As an adult, I need to develop my ability to make wise choices, and in recognizing this, I am accountable and responsible for the misery I allow people, places, and things to bring into my life. I have a voice. I'd like to close with something from Mark Twain. Life is short. Break the rules, forgive quickly, kiss slowly, love truly, laugh uncontrollably, and never regret anything that makes you smile. Thank you for your time and consideration, and for allowing me to share my story. Love you, mean it.